The wind came in hard from the west, scraping dry dust across the prairie like sandpaper on skin. Naomi Holloway squinted into the glare of the sun, one hand shading her brow, the other gripping her little sister's wrist, so tight it left a mark. The youngest Delia didn't protest. She hadn't said a word in an hour. They were all too tired for words. Tobias walked a step behind jaw-clenched eyes burning beneath his soot-dark hair. Jonas limped, his right shoe had split 2 days back, and Micah, silent since the cabin door had been nailed shut behind their mother's coffin, stumbled forward like a shadow hand still tangled in Naomi's skirt hem. Up ahead, a fence, weather-beaten, splintered. Beyond it, a homestead, a barn, a porch, a slanted house whose boards had gone gray with time. Smoke curled thin and blue from a chimney, but otherwise it looked as lifeless as the rest of the valley. Naomi swallowed hard and stepped off the road. "We try this one," she said. Her voice rasped from dust and begging, then no more. Jonas looked up. "Will they have water, maybe?" Delia stumbled. Tobias caught her elbow, helped her back up, but he didn't speak. None of them had eaten since yesterday's handful of berries. They hadn't had clean water in 3 days. As they neared the fence line, Naomi saw a figure, a man, still as stone on the porch. He rose. A flash of steel caught the sun rifle barrel leveled in one slow, practiced motion. The man stepped down from the porch. His boots hit the dirt with the finality of falling axes. Naomi froze, thrusting an arm out to block the others. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Her knees almost gave, but she did not fall. The man stopped 20 feet from them, rifle-steady eyes shadowed by the brim of a weathered hat. "I don't like trespassers," he said. Naomi's voice scraped from her throat. "We're not here to cause trouble, sir. Just water. There's a creek 2 miles east. You'll find what you need there. It's dry." Her jaw firmed. Been dry for weeks. His grip didn't shift. "We won't stay. I swear it. Just 5 minutes at your pump. You've already stayed too long." Naomi's hand tightened on Delia's. Behind her, she felt Tobias inch forward. "You want to shoot us," Tobias said. "Is that the kind of man you are, quiet?" Naomi hissed. But it was too late. The man's eyes flicked to Tobias, sharp and unreadable. Naomi stepped forward, trembling. "We're not asking for your food, just water. My sister's 4. My brother Micah hasn't spoken since Mama died. He won't last to the next town." No answer. She took another breath. "We can work. I can cook clean patch fences. Tobias can chop wood. We're not beggars. I didn't ask what you are." "Then ask." A long silence stretched between them. Jonas whimpered. Micah swayed in place. The wind kicked up dust and slapped it into their eyes, their mouths, their broken shoes. Then Delia tugged her hand free and stepped forward. Her curls were knotted with grit. Her dress was stiff with sweat and road filth. She looked up at the man with her chin trembling and her voice as quiet as breath. "Are you going to shoot us, mister? Or are you the kind of man who lets children die another way?" Everything froze. The wind seemed to hush. The man stared at her. Then, without a word, he lowered the rifle. 5 minutes, he said. Then you move on. Naomi sagged but didn't cry. "Not yet. Thank you. Come on, y'all, quick." They crossed into the yard like deer stepping into a clearing, tense and twitching. Jonas bolted for the pump. Tobias stayed near Naomi, scanning the man's face like he wanted to memorize it. Micah moved only when Naomi tugged him. Delia trailed close behind, dragging her 2 big shoes through the dust. The pump let out a dry creak, then gurgled. Cold water gushed over Jonas's hands, and hit the trough with a splash. He leaned in and drank like a wild thing, water running down his chin. Naomi let go of Micah's hand and started filling their dented canteens. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight finally dropping off her spine. Tobias stayed upright, silent, watching the man. Naomi glanced at him. He hadn't gone back to the porch. He stood nearby, gun at his side, eyes not on the pump, but on them, studying them, as if trying to decide what they were made of. Delia looked up at him and blinked. "I'm Delia," she said softly. "Delia, hush," Naomi muttered. But Delia stepped closer. "What's your name?" The man said nothing. "Are you sad?" she asked. "You look sad." Naomi moved fast, grabbed Delia's hand. "I said hush," but Delia's voice remained steady. "It's okay to be sad. Naomi says it gets better." The man didn't answer. His face stayed unreadable. Naomi hauled Delia back to the pump, but in her chest, her heart kicked and spun like a spooked colt. As she filled the last canteen, she saw the man move toward them. Jonas looked up, wiping his mouth on his sleeve. "Hey, mister. You got food?" Naomi nearly dropped the canteen, but Jonas kept going. "Carrie says we're not supposed to ask, but if you were gonna kill us, I figure you'd have done it already, so maybe you ain't so bad." "Jonas, enough." The man looked down at the boy, then at Naomi. His voice was quiet. "When did y'all last eat some berries this morning?" Naomi said. "And a squirrel 2 days ago," Jonas added. Tobias caught it. The man's jaw tightened. His eyes moved back to Naomi, to Micah, who was staring blankly at the trough water dripping from his chin. Tobias stepped forward, fists clenched. "We don't want pity," he snapped. "We'll keep walking." Naomi turned on him. "Stop it. He's talking to me." Tobias's nostrils flared, but he stepped back. The man's eyes met Naomi's again. "You got 5 mouths," he said, "and nothing to feed them with." She lifted her chin. "We had Mama. She worked herself to death trying to keep us fed, and now it's me." A pause. He looked at Delia, then at Micah. "I got food inside," he said at last. "Bread, bacon, eggs." He hesitated. "I was fixing supper anyhow." Naomi's voice cracked. "Why? Because she asked if I'd let children die." He nodded toward Delia, and I remembered I already buried one. Naomi's breath caught. "Come inside," he said, "before it gets cold." And with that, he turned and walked toward the porch, leaving the door open behind him. Tobias didn't move, but Naomi gathered her siblings, lifted Delia onto her hip, and took Micah's hand. She stepped into the open door of a man whose name she didn't yet know, only that he had once buried a daughter and was now letting 5 strangers breathe beneath his roof. Behind her, Tobias muttered under his breath, "This is a bad idea." Naomi didn't turn. "We've had worse ones." "Of course. Please upload or paste the full story that you would like me to base this new 12-chapter version on, so I can apply the full set of rules and continue with writing. Chapter 2 in the required style, tone, and logic. Right now the story file appears to be missing or failed to load. Once I have that, I'll integrate your full 12-chapter outline. Use the hook quote and emotional flow for Chapter 2. Ensure continuity and connection from the first chapter. Maintain your voice style setting and dramatic tone exactly as you asked. Please upload the story or let me know if you want to repaste the content here. Don't worry, sweetheart. There's more warmth in a barn with love than in a mansion without it. The morning sun hadn't yet touched the sky when Elsie stirred, tangled in the makeshift quilt bed Tobias had laid in the corner of the barn. The scent of hay and old pine filled the space. Her arms instinctively searched for Lily, but the child had already scampered off, her giggles floating from where Tobias was feeding the horses. For a moment, Elsie allowed herself a small smile, a fragile peace, barely a whisper in the chaos. She rose, brushing straw from her skirt, and stepped into her boots. The chill hadn't lifted, and the frost clung to the barn doors like stubborn memories. Pushing them open revealed a wide Montana morning. Mist curled over the fields like breath on a cold mirror, and the Bluebell Range beyond stood etched in silver light. Inside the corral, Tobias was teaching Lily how to toss feed into the troughs. He wore an old coat patched at the elbows, his hat low over his brow. Elsie paused to take in the scene. Her daughter's hair bounced with each skip, her laugh full, and unguarded a sound she hadn't heard in weeks. "You're up early," Tobias called, catching her eye with that same gentle steadiness he'd shown the night before. "Hard to sleep when your bones remember the cold," Elsie replied, arms folded tightly across her chest. "Come on in then. I got coffee warming on the stove in the bunkhouse." His voice was easy without the pity she'd grown used to. She hesitated, glancing at the barn, at Lily, and then at the house across the yard, the house with curtains drawn, empty windows, staring. "I don't want to trouble your wife." Tobias's hand stilled where it rested on the rail. "Ain't no wife here," he said quietly. "Not anymore." That stopped her. "I'm sorry. No need. That chapter closed years ago. Now come on." He nodded toward the bunkhouse. Elsie followed him inside, where the warmth from the cast iron stove wrapped around her like a worn coat. The small space smelled of cedar and tobacco. A simple table, 2 chairs, and shelves filled with books and tools made up the living quarters. He poured coffee into a chipped mug and set it before her, steam rising like forgiveness. "You always take strangers into your barn?" she asked, holding the cup with both hands. "Only the ones with nothing left but heart," he answered, matter of fact. The words struck her somewhere deep, like balm and salt all at once. Lily burst in behind them, cheeks flushed, boots muddy. "Mama, Mr. Tobias let me pet Midnight. He says I have good hands." "She does," Tobias confirmed, kneeling to help Lily out of her coat. "Animals can tell who means 'em well." The rest of the day moved slow but full. Tobias gave Lily little chores, sweeping the feed room, brushing the old mule, while Elsie helped mend the broken fence near the north pasture. Her fingers, though stiff, remembered the rhythm of stitching wood and wire. The wind didn't bite as hard with work in her hands. At lunch, Tobias brought out a skillet of cornbread and beans. They ate on the porch of the bunkhouse, legs stretched and backs straight like they belonged. "I ain't offering the Ritz," Tobias said, chewing thoughtfully. "It's more than we've had in weeks," Elsie replied. "And Lily?" "She's smiling again." He nodded. "She's tough like her mama." The compliment sat uneasily with her. She wanted to believe it, but too many nights of hunger and fear still clung to her skin. Later, as dusk pulled long shadows over the land, Elsie walked out to the barn. She needed space to think, to feel the earth again. Inside, she found old tack-worn saddles and an entire wall lined with dusty photographs. Tobias, younger and clean-shaven, stood beside a woman in several of them. A child was in 2 others, golden curls and big eyes. She reached out, brushing a frame with her fingers. "She was 6 when we lost her." Tobias's voice came from behind, soft and sorrowful. Elsie turned. His face was unreadable in the dim light. "Her name was Abigail," he added. "Fever came fast. By the time Doc Riggs made it through the snow, it was too late." "I'm so sorry." He stepped beside her, arms crossed. "It's why I heard Lily's voice last night and couldn't shut the door. Some sounds you never forget." They stood in silence. 2 ghosts standing on sacred ground. "I don't know how long we can stay," Elsie murmured, eyes on the floor. "You can stay as long as you need," Tobias said. "Barn ain't much, but it's warm, and I can fix up that spare room in the house." She looked at him, then really looked. "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone should have done it for me." The next few days passed with a rhythm they hadn't known in years. Elsie cooked in the mornings, folding into the old kitchen like she'd always been there. Lily followed Tobias like a duckling, learning tools' names of horses, feeding routines. Each day she stood taller. Word spread through the valley like wildfire. Some of the ranch hands came by curious about the woman and child holed up in Tobias McKay's barn. Most left with nods or baskets of food. One woman, a neighbor named Mrs. Carradine, brought extra blankets and honey biscuits and whispered, "It's about time he had noise in that place again." But not all faces were kind. One afternoon, a polished truck rolled down the gravel road. A man stepped out, clean boots, stiff posture, and eyes like cold water. "Tobias," he said as he stepped onto the porch. "Rhett." Tobias stiffened. "What brings the banker round?" Rhett glanced past him to where Elsie stood in the doorway. "Just checking on things. Word is you've taken in strays." Elsie's jaw tensed, but Tobias placed a firm hand on the railing. "You checking on me or checking on the land?" Tobias said flatly. Rhett offered a tight smile. "Both, I suppose. Old debts don't disappear just because your heart gets soft." Elsie didn't breathe. Her hands curled at her sides. Tobias stepped closer, his voice like iron. "They don't disappear, but neither does my word. And I gave it to them." Rhett tipped his hat, but the message was clear. Trouble was coming. As the truck pulled away in a cloud of dust, Lily came running from the barn. "Mama, what's wrong?" Elsie knelt, arms around her daughter. "Nothing, baby. We're just learning who our real friends are." Tobias stood behind them, gaze still on the road. "He won't scare me off. Not again." But his jaw stayed tight long after sunset. And later that night, while Elsie laid Lily down beneath thick quilts, she wondered how many ghosts this land had buried, and whether they'd let her stay long enough to build something new from the broken. "She doesn't need a mansion, Rhett. She needs safety. And I'll give her that with my bare hands if I have to." The snow didn't come that night, but the sky stayed low and heavy, and the chill pressed hard enough to feel like a warning. Inside the bunkhouse, the fire in the cast iron stove popped with soft cracks, while Lily snored gently on the cot, one arm flung over her stuffed bear. Elsie sat in the rocker near the fire, rubbing warmth into her knees, but her thoughts were far from sleep. The banker's visit had left a shadow in the room, one Tobias hadn't spoken of since. She heard his boots crunch the gravel outside before he opened the door. Tobias stepped in, dusting off his coat, the cold clinging to his shoulders. "Heard coyote down by the tree line," he said. "Check the fence just in case." "Everything all right?" Elsie asked, watching him pour coffee even though it was near midnight. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "Fence held. Just spooked me, that's all." They both knew it wasn't the fence that had him on edge. It was Rhett. Elsie studied him. The firelight danced across his profile lines, around his mouth, a small scar beneath his left ear. He looked tired, but not defeated. "Can I ask something?" she finally said. "You can ask anything. That man, Rhett." "Is he dangerous?" Tobias didn't answer at first. Then he sighed and leaned against the wall. "Rhett Colburn's dangerous the way winter is. Slow creeping, always dressed in Sunday manners. But if you're not paying attention, he'll gut you while smiling." Her breath caught. "He threatened the land, didn't he? Been eyeing it for years. Wants to buy it up, break it into parcels for out-of-state investors. He's already done it to 3 other ranches in the valley. Waits till folks are too tired or broke or grieving to fight back." Elsie's heart pounded. "You said old debts." "I took out a loan when my wife passed," Tobias admitted. "Tried to keep the ranch afloat. Didn't go under, but I came close. I'm still digging out of it." Rhett holds the note. And now you've taken us in. Doesn't that put you at more risk? He met her eyes then. I'd rather risk losing a barn than look back one day, knowing I turned away a mother and child in the cold. Her throat tightened. You don't even know us. I know enough. The wind rattled the eaves. Somewhere out past the pasture, a distant owl called. Tobias rubbed his hands together. I'll talk to him. Make arrangements if I have to. But I won't let him bully this place into silence. Elsie rose, slowly crossing the room until she stood just beside him. You don't owe us that. I don't do it because I owe you, he said. I do it because no one did it for me. The silence stretched between them, thick with things not yet said. Then Lily stirred, mumbling in her sleep, and the moment broke. The next morning, the wind howled louder, and the air bit sharper. Tobias was already in the fields before sunup, hauling hay checking troughs. Elsie bundled Lily up and walked her down to the barn where Midnight waited at the gate like he'd been expecting them. Lily giggled when Midnight nuzzled her hood. He remembers me, Mama, of course he does. Elsie smiled, rubbing the gelding's nose. He knows kindness. Inside the barn, Elsie helped Tobias sort feed, while Lily swept the aisles with a broom twice her size. The small routines of the day gave Elsie a strange comfort. Her muscles ached, her back groaned, but her mind rested. After lunch, a truck rumbled up the lane again, but this one was older worn and carried the dust of honest miles. A stout woman climbed out, wrapped in a thick shawl and a tighter scowl. Mrs. Carradine. Tobias greeted her, wiping his hands. Brought you some soup and that sewing you loaned me, she huffed, thrusting a basket at him. And I came to see this woman you got folks whisperin' about. Elsie stepped out from the barn, Lily by her side. She met the woman's sharp gaze with quiet steel. Well, you're not the devil I see, Mrs. Carradine muttered. Then to Lily, You eat your greens, young lady. Lily nodded solemnly. When there are any, the woman's expression softened like butter left too long on the counter. Come on then. Let's get this inside. Looks like you could use meat on your bones. By sundown, Mrs. Carradine had invited herself to supper, taken over Elsie's kitchen knife, and left with promises of blankets and socks. It wasn't love, but it was something like acceptance. That night, Tobias walked the perimeter again. Elsie waited on the porch, wrapped in her old coat hands, clasped beneath the stars. When he returned, she asked, Do you think we can stay? Not just a few days, but longer. He leaned against the railing, quiet for a beat. If it's up to me, yes. What if Rhett makes it not up to you? His eyes flicked toward the hills where the wind danced silver across the frozen grass. Then he'll learn I'm not as quiet as I used to be. Inside, Lily's shadow danced behind the windows, playing with the lantern light. I don't want Lily to keep moving, Elsie whispered. She's finally breathing again. She doesn't need a mansion, Rhett. She needs safety. And I'll give her that with my bare hands if I have to. Tobias's voice was low but firm like rock under snow. He looked at her then, and in his eyes was something she hadn't dared believe in for a long time belief. The wind blew hard that night, shaking the barn rafters. But inside, the lantern stayed lit, and when dawn broke, it wasn't Rhett who came riding up the road. It was Sheriff Macy, reins in one hand, expression unreadable. Tobias met him halfway down the lane, coat flapping in the morning gust. I hear there's been some talk about squatters on your land, the sheriff said slowly, gaze flicking toward the barn. Tobias didn't flinch. They're not squatters. They're guests. Sheriff Macy dismounted, boots crunching frost. Well, Rhett Colburn filed a formal complaint. Claims you're harboring vagrants and jeopardizing collateral on a loan. He's trying to push me into selling. Always has. I'm not here to push. But you know how this town runs, Tobias. If Colburn presses, he's got pull at the courthouse. I won't be intimidated. The sheriff studied him a long moment. I hope not. 'Cause he's coming back with papers, and next time he won't be alone. Behind Tobias, Elsie stood at the porch, arms around Lily, her hair lifted by the breeze. Tobias turned slightly, eyes meeting hers across the distance. The ground was shifting beneath them. But he nodded once, sure and calm. They stay, he said. And inside the bunkhouse, the fire burned steady. There's more fight in that woman than the whole town's got in its bones. The sky was dark by the time Elsie came back from the barn, brushing straw from her skirt and wiping her hands on a rag that had seen better days. Tobias had been silent since the sheriff rode off. Not angry, just the kind of quiet that brewed under the ribs and stayed there like weather. She'd seen it in men before. But this quiet wasn't laced with pride or powerlessness. It was steady, controlled. Inside the bunkhouse, Lily was painting with watercolors that Mrs. Carradine had brought over in a paper sack, tongues of red and orange bleeding into blue across scrap paper. Tobias sat at the kitchen table, turning over a folder left behind by the sheriff. Elsie recognized the county seal, foreclosure warning. She poured 2 cups of coffee, one for her, and one she set down in front of him. Tobias didn't touch it, just ran his thumb across the edge of the page like he was feeling the grain of something older than time. I saw your name, she said softly, standing beside him, on the documents. I told you the loan was in his hands, Tobias muttered. What I didn't say was that he was waiting for me to give up. One more late payment and the ranch goes to auction. Elsie sat down across from him. And now he's trying to call your kindness a liability. Tobias finally looked at her. He doesn't care about people, just land, title, profit, and the town lets him. He leaned back, arms folded. Most folks here don't own enough to push back, and the ones who do got history with his family generations deep. Nobody wants to stir up the old ghosts. Elsie reached across the table, touching his hand. What if we stir them anyway? He stared at her fingers on his. That could ruin me. I'm already ruined, she said plainly. You think I haven't had men like Rhett push me down, call me dirt, throw me out like trash? Her voice had an edge now, one that sounded like steel filed down to a blade, almost didn't interrupt. He wants to scare you, she continued. But he hasn't faced someone with nothing left to lose. I have no home, no money, no name worth anything in this world. But I do have my daughter, and I won't let him take one more safe place from her. She paused, breathing hard. I can't fight with fists, but I know how to stand. Tobias looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. There's more fight in that woman, he said quietly, than the whole town's got in its bones. The next day, Elsie rode into town in Tobias's old pickup, the brakes squealing like hounds every time she eased to a stop. She didn't ask his permission, just told him what she planned to do, and asked if the gas tank was full. He'd nodded and handed her his good gloves. Main Street was quiet, as snow whispered on the edges of the roofs, not falling yet, but promising to. Folks glanced up as she stepped out. She didn't wear anything fancy, just her coat boots and a braid tucked tight, but it wasn't the outfit that caught eyes. It was her presence. Firm eyes forward. She walked straight into the feed store where the old clerk, Gus, looked like he'd swallowed a nail. You're Elsie, ain't you? He asked. I am. What brings you in? She set a bundle of flyers on the counter, plain paper, bold type. Town meeting, Saturday night, barn at Carradine's. We're going to talk about Rhett Colburn, his land buys, and what he's doing to this valley. Gus blinked. That's bold. It's overdue. She left one at the diner. the post office, even slid one into the church door. At the hardware store, an older man stopped her and asked, "Are you the woman staying at Hollow Creek?" "Yes, sir. Folks are saying Tobias Hart finally let someone in." She met his gaze. "He let us live." The man nodded slowly, and without another word took 2 flyers and walked off down the road. By the time Elsie drove back, the wind had picked up, and the fields wore a thin dusting of snow. Tobias met her on the porch with Lily curled on his shoulder, napping. She climbed the steps and took her daughter gently into her arms. "You didn't have to go alone," Tobias said. "I had to be seen." He opened the door for her. "And were you—" "Oh, they saw me," she replied. "And I think some of them remembered who they used to be." That evening, Tobias took down the old boxes from the attic records, receipts, photos of his father, with the original ranch deed in hand. They spread the papers across the kitchen table and began sorting everything that proved his history here, his ownership, the improvements made, the value added. It was part memory, part preparation. If they were going to fight Rhett's paper war, they'd need their own arsenal. Mrs. Carradine showed up again the next morning, arms loaded with pies and righteous fury. "You lit a fire," she said to Elsie, slapping a cherry pie on the table. "Phone's been ringing off the hook since your flyers went up." "Good," Elsie said, pulling out a chair. "Let's keep it burning." Carradine smiled. "Might be time the town got a woman with backbone instead of a man with land." As they prepared for the gathering, Tobias watched Elsie from across the barn. She moved with focus, her sleeves rolled, face streaked with dust and determination. He felt something shift in his chest, quiet, unfamiliar, like a lantern lit inside ribs, long cold. "She's not just surviving," he whispered to himself. "She's rebuilding." And as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long amber streaks across the snow-dusted pastures, the wind finally eased. Inside the barn, lanterns flickered to life. Hay bales lined up for seats and people 10 at first, then 20 began to arrive. Rhett hadn't shown up yet, but the town had, and that was something. She didn't just speak. She made the walls of that old barn tremble with truth. The old barn groaned with bodies, boots crunching straw lanterns, casting long shadows across the rough-hewn beams. Cold air pushed through the cracks in the walls, but the people didn't seem to mind. They came bundled in flannel and denim, every hat pulled low, eyes, sharp, lips tight. It wasn't just curiosity that brought them out tonight. It was memory. It was grief. And for some, maybe shame. Tobias stood by the far stall with his arms crossed, watching. He hadn't said much all day, just worked alongside Elsie, hammering up the old chalkboard, arranging hay bales for benches, making sure the stove stayed lit. Now he stayed back in the shadows, letting her have the center. Elsie stood by the hayloft ladder, her hands clasped tight in front of her lips, parted just slightly, like she was still gathering the weight of her words. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and she saw not just faces, but decisions, men who sold parcels to Rhett. Women who'd turned away when others lost theirs, elders who remembered when Tobias's father still rode the fence lines. The murmuring quieted as folks settled in. The barn held its breath. Then she stepped forward. "I'm not from here," she began, voice strong but low. "You know that? You don't owe me anything." A few heads tilted, curious. "But I came here with a little girl and a broken past, and this ranch, this man gave us shelter. Not charity, dignity." Tobias blinked at that. Dignity. The word hit harder than he expected. She kept going, her eyes finding the sheriff in the back corner, arms folded, hat tilted low. "I found out last week that someone's trying to take this land, not because it's worthless, but because it's worth something. History, soil, water rights, all of it." A woman near the front, old Miss Harlan from the church, nodded slowly. "My name's not on the deed," Elsie said. but I've walked the fence lines. I've cleaned out the barns, brushed the horses, fixed what I could with the hands I have. I've watched Lily fall asleep under a roof that didn't leak for the first time in months. This place is a sanctuary. She drew in a breath. And if we let men like Rhett Colburn strip us of our sanctuaries, then what do we become? There was a pause. Thick silence. Elsie stepped back a little, her hands trembling now. You don't have to fight for me, but you might want to ask yourselves who else you've stopped fighting for. How many neighbors you've lost. How many friends you haven't checked in on. Gus from the feed store cleared his throat. He bought my cousin's place. Promised to let her stay. She was gone a month later. Whispers swept through the barn like wind through dry leaves. A younger man in the back, a ranch hand from the East Range, spoke next. He offered me triple pay to work his new spread. Said I'd get a piece. I ain't seen one contract. Then it snowballed. Voices from every direction. Quiet ones. Angry ones, grieving ones. Tobias moved closer to the front, now eyes on Elsie. She stood still in the middle of the storm, letting it rise. Not interrupting, not taking credit, just listening. Mrs. Carradine stood up, suddenly clapping her hands once. All right, she said. Let's get organized. People turned. I've got a folder of past land transfers Rhett's pushed through. My late husband left records. We can match them against the foreclosure filings. If there's a pattern of fraud, the county might have to investigate. I'll draft a letter, said Miss Harlan. Public petition, signatures. Give it to the state. They'll listen if we're loud enough. I got tools, the ranch hand added. I'll help fix up fences, barns, anything that'll keep this place above water until we know what's coming. Tobias watched, stunned. It was as if a spark had lit the very timbers of the town's soul. And Elsie, she was the match that lit it. He stepped forward, quieting the room with nothing but presence. I built this place from what my father left me, but I let it go quiet too long. Thought if I kept my head down, Rhett would pass me by. He looked at Elsie, but then someone walked in carrying more courage than I ever had, and reminded me what it means to protect what's yours. Elsie's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I won't back down, Tobias said to the crowd. Not now, not ever again. A slow clap started Carradine again, and soon the barn echoed with it. Applause born not from victory, but from the will to stand. She didn't just speak. Carradine whispered to the sheriff beside her. She made the walls of that old barn tremble with truth. The sheriff said nothing, but his jaw flexed. After the meeting, when the barn had emptied and lanterns burned low, Elsie sat on the top rail of the old stall. Tobias leaned beside her. You did more than I ever could, he said. You built the place. I just reminded folks why it matters. He glanced down. That folder the sheriff left. It's been bothering me. Why there's a signature on the original mortgage that isn't mine. Looked like my dad's, but not quite. I want to see it again. Closely. Elsie's brow furrowed. You think it was forged, don't know yet. But if it was, we might have more than just a land grab on our hands. They both fell quiet, the kind of silence that listens to the creak of old wood and the soft breaths of a sleeping child behind the door. Snow began to fall outside, thin at first, then thick as white gauze. It blanketed the ranch in stillness, but not in surrender. Inside the barn, a plan was forming, not of revenge, but of reclamation. And in the hush that followed, the wind carried one sound above all others, the whisper of people finding their voices again. I don't care whose name is on the deed, this land remembers who loved it. The morning after the barn meeting came hushed and silver, the world blanketed in snow so pure, it seemed to have hushed even the wind. Elsie stepped out onto the porch, Lily bundled in her arms and still half asleep, her cheek pressed to Elsie's shoulder. The hush was beautiful, but beneath it ran tension like the ranch itself was holding its breath. Tobias had already saddled up. He stood by the corral, coat collar turned high, the folder Carradine had left tucked under his arm. When he saw Elsie, he gave a small nod, not cold, just focused. "I'm heading into town," he said. "There's something in this file that doesn't sit right." Elsie glanced at the manila folder. The signature Tobias nodded. "I compared it to my father's branding records. His loops and tails were tighter. This one's loose, sloppy like someone trying to fake the style." Her brow furrowed. "So someone forged it, I won't know for sure, until I get a handwriting expert or maybe someone at the bank who remembers." He glanced down at the snow-covered ground. But if this document was faked, then Rhett's been doing more than buying land. He's been stealing it. Elsie swallowed. "Be careful." Tobias gave her a tight smile, then turned and rode out the snow, muffling the hoofbeats. Lily stirred in Elsie's arms. "Mama, is the snow gonna hurt the horses? No, baby," she whispered. "The horses know how to wait out the cold." By mid-morning, Elsie was inside the barn, brushing down Belle, the mare, who'd carried her and Lily on the worst night of their lives. The mare leaned into her strokes, eyes soft steam rising off her back. Every time Elsie touched the horse's side, she felt grounded again, reminded that roots didn't always come from blood, but from care. The barn door creaked open. It was Ezra, Tobias's oldest friend, grizzled, stoop-shouldered, his coat patched with years of weather. "Elsie," he said, breath puffing white, "I heard about the meeting." She set down the brush and wiped her hands. "Word travels fast when it's got fire behind it." He stepped closer. "You stirred folks up in a way I haven't seen since Tobias's daddy passed." "I didn't mean to stir, I meant to stand." Ezra gave her a slow nod, and that's what made it powerful. He looked around the barn, his gaze lingering on the patched roof, the worn beams, the rows of tools clean and hung with care. "You know," he said, "I helped lay some of these boards when Tobias was no taller than my belt. Back then, this place had songs in the rafters. Lately, it's been quiet. Until now." Elsie smiled faintly. "I just wanted to give Lily a place that didn't feel like a motel room." "She's got more than that now," Ezra said gently. "And so do we." She looked up at him. "You believe Rhett forged that document?" Ezra scowled. "I believe Rhett don't know the meaning of honest, but to fake a deed, that's dangerous business. If it's true, the law's got to get involved." Elsie turned to the window where the sun had begun to melt patches of snow, revealing muddy ruts and worn grass underneath. "I don't care whose name is on the deed, this land remembers who loved it," she said quietly. Ezra nodded, then added in a gravelly voice, "And it'll fight for 'em too if we let it." That afternoon, the sheriff pulled up in his cruiser, his face unreadable. Elsie met him at the porch. "Sheriff Blackwell," she said, wary. He tipped his hat. "Elsie, Tobias in." He rode into town, said he needed to check something at the bank. The sheriff's lips pressed thin. "I saw him there, but that's not why I'm here." Elsie braced herself. "What then?" Blackwell pulled out a paper and handed it over. "This is a notice. Rhett Colburn's filed for expedited foreclosure. Claims Tobias defaulted on payment 6 months back." Her eyes scanned the paper. The date. The legalese. Her pulse kicked up hard. "This isn't possible," she said. "We've been making payments. Tobias showed me. I'm not saying it's right," the sheriff said. "I'm saying it's filed. He's moving fast, too fast." Which makes me wonder what he's trying to bury. Elsie's hands trembled. "How long do we have? 30 days if we're lucky. Maybe less if he pushes." The wind picked up, then curling around the porch posts, whistling through the boards like the land itself had heard the news. Elsie looked out at the ranch, then back to Blackwell. "You believe him?" The sheriff hesitated. "I believe in evidence, and I believe people make mistakes when they rush." He climbed back into his cruiser, but left her with one last look. "Tell Tobias to watch his back." When Tobias returned late that evening, his coat dusted with snow and his jaw tight, Elsie met him in the kitchen. She poured hot coffee without a word. He dropped the folder on the table. "The signature's fake," he said. "I found one of the old clerks from the bank. She remembered my father's writing. Says this file came in after he died." Elsie's eyes widened. So the mortgage was filed posthumously. Tobias nodded grimly. "Which means it's not just illegal, it's criminal." She slid the notice from Blackwell across the table. Tobias stared at it, then back at her. "He's trying to cover his tracks," Tobias muttered. "Push us out before we can prove anything." Elsie's voice was quiet but fierce. "Then we prove it faster." Outside, the wind carried snow off the roof like whispers from the mountains. Inside, two people sat at a table not just planning to save a ranch, but to expose a lie big enough to shake the whole valley. Tobias reached for the folder again. "We need a lawyer, one not bought off." Elsie nodded. "And we need to call everyone from that barn meeting. Tell them it's time." Tobias looked over at her. "You're not scared, I am," she said. "But I've been scared before. This time I've got something to fight for. You picked the wrong woman to corner because I'm not leaving the way I came." The courthouse hallway smelled like old paper and lemon polish, the air thick with the quiet tension of held breath and whispered stakes. Elsie sat on the bench outside the hearing room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Tobias paced beside her like a caged animal jaw, clenched boots striking the floor in sharp, restless steps. Ezra stood near the wall, arms crossed, keeping watch like a silent sentinel. Elsie had braided Lily's hair that morning with trembling fingers, pressing a kiss to her forehead, before leaving her with Maybelle and a stack of coloring books. "Mama's got to help the ranch today," she'd said. And Lily had nodded solemnly, like she understood this was more than grown-up business. This was war. Carradine's high-dollar attorney passed them with a smug glance, tapping something into his phone. Elsie met his gaze with steady eyes. She didn't have a tailored suit or a briefcase full of loopholes, but she had truth, and she had fire. The door opened. Sheriff Blackwell stepped out, adjusting his collar, his face drawn. "They're ready for you," he said. Inside the room was wood-paneled and stark. A judge with iron-gray hair sat behind the bench, spectacles low on his nose. Rhett sat at the petitioner's table, clean-shaven tie knotted too tight, a performative frown tugging at the corners of his mouth. Elsie followed Tobias to the respondent's table. Her boots clicked softly, her shoulders square. The lawyer they'd found, Miss Claire Hammond, smoothed out a folder of evidence in front of them. The judge cleared his throat. "This is a hearing to address the foreclosure proceedings on the Colburn Ranch property. Petitioner, you may proceed." Rhett's attorney stood, his voice slick as oil. "Your Honor, Mr. Tobias Colburn has defaulted on the mortgage filed by his late father and is delinquent by more than 6 months. We move for immediate foreclosure to protect our client's interests." Claire rose next, her voice crisp and clear. "Your Honor, we intend to present evidence that the mortgage document in question was fraudulently filed after the death of John Colburn. We request a stay of foreclosure until this matter can be fully investigated." The judge's brows lifted. "Fraud," Miss Hammond Claire held up a photocopy. "This is the contested deed. Note the signature. Now compare it to 5 verified examples of Mr. Colburn's writing. Even a layman can see the difference." The judge adjusted his glasses. "Do you have a handwriting expert?" "We do," Claire said. Sworn affidavit enclosed. Rhett shifted in his chair. His smug exterior faltered. Claire pressed on. "Furthermore, we've recovered records showing this mortgage was never filed until weeks after Mr. Colburn's death. We believe Mr. Rhett Colburn or someone acting in his interest filed it to usurp ownership." Rhett stood, face flushed. "That's a lie." The judge banged the gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Colburn." Elsie sat still, every muscle taut. She could feel the courtroom sway with every word. The judge looked over the documents again, then peered down at Rhett's lawyer. "Do you have a rebuttal?" The man cleared his throat. "This is the first time we've heard these allegations. We request time to review denied," the judge said sharply. "If you're demanding foreclosure, you should have reviewed your own documents more thoroughly." A rustle of reaction moved through the small crowd of townsfolk who had shown up, ranchers, neighbors, even shop owners. They sat behind Elsie and Tobias, quiet but present. Ezra tipped his hat toward the bench. "We're requesting the foreclosure be thrown out," Claire continued, "and we will be pressing for criminal investigation regarding the filing." The judge looked between the two tables, then leaned back. "Due to the serious nature of the fraud claim, I am placing a hold on the foreclosure. A full investigation will proceed. Any party found guilty of falsifying legal documents will be held accountable under Montana state law." The gavel struck wood again. Rhett shot to his feet. "This is my land, my inheritance." The judge raised an eyebrow. "It was your father's land. And if you truly respected that, you wouldn't have tarnished it with backdoor deals." Tobias stood slowly, his voice calm but ice-cold. "You tried to steal from your own blood." Rhett's lip curled. "You're the bastard who ran the place into the ground." Tobias didn't flinch. "And you're the coward who couldn't face what this ranch needed, love, not lawyers." Rhett took a step forward. "She's the reason you've turned into this," he snarled, pointing at Elsie. "She's got no right to be here." Elsie stepped between them. She didn't yell. She didn't raise a hand. Her voice was calm, grounded like a fence post in packed earth. "You picked the wrong woman to corner because I'm not leaving the way I came." The room went still. Even the judge paused. Rhett stared at her, unsure how to respond. "I walked in with fear," once she said. "But today I walked in with truth. I walked in with a daughter to protect. I walked in standing beside a man who knows what it means to earn something rather than steal it. I'm not the same woman I was. And this place won't bend to you. Not ever again." Rhett's mouth opened, then closed. He turned and stormed out of the room, shoving open the doors with a thud that echoed through the courthouse. Ezra stood and clapped a single hand against his thigh. "Well," he muttered, "hell of a speech." Outside, the clouds had begun to break, soft light dappling through gray into gold. Elsie breathed deep. Tobias placed a hand on her back. "You were steady as oak," he said. Her voice wavered just once. "I felt Mama in me, and every woman who ever held a child in one hand and a battle in the other." He looked at her, quiet admiration softening the angles of his face. "We're not done fighting." "I know," she said. "But we've got the truth now. That's more than enough for round two." Down the courthouse steps, the townspeople waited. They didn't cheer or clap, but they nodded. Silent, firm approval. It wasn't over. But something had shifted. They walked out into the waiting day. Not as victims, but as defenders of something sacred, and the land wind stirring snow off pine branches, sun glinting through the clearing, seemed to know it too. "If you wanted to break me, you should have done it before I knew who I was." The bitter wind hadn't let up, dragging frost along the fence lines, and whispering through the cracks in the barn boards. But something inside Elsie had thawed. That courtroom had tried to pull the last of her strength out, and she'd stood her ground. The next morning, she rose before the sun pulled on her coat and went out to feed the herd with Tobias. The ranch was bruised, but not beaten. The foreman's house still needed repairs. The south pasture fencing sagged like tired shoulders, and they were behind on winter feed. But the foreclosure had been halted, and the land hadn't been stripped from under them. That meant there was still breath in the fight, and breath was all Elsie needed. By mid-morning, she was brushing down clover in the barn when she heard tires crunch in the snow-packed drive. She looked up and wiped her hands on her jeans, stepping out, just as Rhett's truck rumbled to a stop beside the porch. Tobias came from the direction of the woodshed, eyes narrowing. Rhett got out slow, his face carved in ice, a man who'd gambled everything and come up short. Elsie's heartbeat didn't rise. She didn't flinch. "You're not welcome here," Tobias said flatly. "I didn't come to fight," Rhett muttered, though his jaw was tight. "Came to talk." "You said everything in court," Elsie said. Rhett looked at her, something unspoken flickering in his gaze. "Not everything." She stepped down from the porch. "Then say it. Out here, in the cold. No more secrets wrapped in mahogany walls." Rhett shoved his hands into his coat pockets. "I spent my whole damn life trying to be what Dad wanted, and he gave the ranch to you." Tobias's voice was gravel. He gave it to the one who showed up when it mattered. Rhett's eyes cut to Elsie. "And you. You don't belong here." "I didn't," she said, "but I do now." Rhett let out a bitter laugh. "You think you've won something?" Elsie took a step forward. "I think I found something." "That's more than you can say." "You stole this place," he growled. "No," she said, her voice low but firm. "I bled for it. I cried for it. I worked when you disappeared. I stayed when it was easier to run. And I didn't forge my father-in-law's name on a deed." "You have no idea what it's like to be overlooked," he snapped. "To be the one expected to carry the family name and be treated like nothing." Elsie's eyes flashed. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare talk about being overlooked to a woman who raised her child alone, worked 3 jobs, and watched doors close because she didn't come from the right family. You weren't overlooked, Rhett. You were ungrateful." He took a step forward, hands twitching. "You think you're better than me now?" "I think I finally see you clearly," she said, unmoving. "You wanted the title without the work. You wanted the reward without the responsibility. You don't know what this land means because you've never listened to it." Silence fell. Then she said it slow and clear. "If you wanted to break me, you should have done it before I knew who I was." Rhett's face tightened, the fight draining from him like a slashed tire. He looked at Tobias, but Tobias didn't move. "You could still leave," Rhett muttered. "Start over, take your daughter and go. You don't have to be part of this." Elsie tilted her head. "You don't understand. This place isn't just dirt and timber anymore. It's the first home my daughter's ever known that didn't come with a countdown. And it's the first time I've looked in a mirror and seen a woman my mama would be proud of." Rhett blinked, caught off guard by the softness in her tone. "So you're staying? Even after all this?" She nodded. "Especially because of all this." He scoffed. "Don't expect an apology." "I don't," she said. "Apologies are for people who understand what they broke." Rhett turned, climbed back into his truck, and slammed the door. The engine started with a growl, then he pulled out and disappeared down the frozen lane. Tobias exhaled. "You didn't have to go toe-to-toe with him." "I did," she said. "For Lily. For me. For this land." He looked at her, something reverent in his eyes. "You're not the same woman who stepped off that bus." She smiled. And you're not the man who hid in the barn with his grief. Snow started falling, then soft, slow, delicate flakes like the earth exhaling. They stood there in the stillness of it, shoulder to shoulder. Inside the house, Lily was humming as she colored Maybelle humming along as she cooked beans and cornbread on the stove. The air smelled of wood smoke and sage. It was a simple day, but one hard-earned. That night, Elsie stepped out onto the porch alone. She looked out over the land, the fences stretching like lines on a palm, the fields blanketed in moonlight. Somewhere deep in her chest, something had uncoiled. Not anger, not fear. Peace. She hadn't come looking for this life. She'd been pushed here by loss, betrayal, survival. But what she'd found through every fight, every lie exposed, every cold night spent wondering how to hold on was something no one could take from her now. Her voice, her spine, her name. Elsie Colburn. And by God, she would wear it like armor. When you realize no one is coming to save you, you build the door, the roof, and light the fire yourself. The early thaw came like a whispered promise. The snow melted off the ridge in long, slow ribbons trickling through the pasture and soaking the earth. The muddy fields shimmered with hope and labor. Spring didn't announce herself with trumpet fanfare. She crept in quiet and sure like a woman returning home with her chin held high. Elsie stepped down from the porch with work gloves in her pocket and a hammer in her hand. Tobias had sketched out plans for a new chicken coop, and she'd offered to help, not because she was needed, but because her muscles craved the ache of honest work. It grounded her, built something beneath the bruises of everything she'd weathered. Lily ran past, her hair wild, laughter spilling across the yard. "I'm gonna beat Maybelle to the barn. You better not trip over your own boots again." Maybelle called, chasing after her with an apple in one hand and a feed sack in the other. Elsie smiled at the sound of them, the sound of a life being lived. Tobias was already laying out the beams when she reached the edge of the property line. His tools were neatly arranged on the tarp, and the smell of cedar and dirt filled the air. He glanced at her, nodded, and handed her a board. They worked without many words. It was the rhythm of hammer and nail, of shared silence, of leaning on each other without needing to say it out loud. "You ever build anything like this before?" he asked after a while. She shook her head. "Nope, but I've rebuilt everything else." He smirked. "That's the spirit." They kept at it for hours until the wind picked up and carried the scent of rain from the west. Elsie paused, looking over the hills toward the road, where the mailbox leaned slightly, and the tracks of Rhett's truck were long since erased by weather. "You think he'll come back?" she asked. Tobias didn't stop hammering. "Maybe. Men like him don't always stay gone. But he'll come back to something different." She nodded slowly, running her hand along the edge of the beam they'd just fastened. "I used to think someone would come for me. That someone would see me struggling and reach out a hand." Tobias finally looked at her. "And now I know," she said, voice steady. "When you realize no one is coming to save you, you build the door, the roof, and light the fire yourself." The words sat heavy in the air, not sad, not bitter, just true. And in that truth was a kind of strength that no one could rip away. They finished the frame before the rain started covering the tools and stepping under the old tin lean-to as the drizzle turned to downpour. It pinged against the metal like a song, sharp, steady, alive. "I got a letter from the county office," Tobias said, watching the rain. "Yeah, they approved the grant for the fencing project. Said our documentation about the ranch's historical significance helped." Elsie blinked. "You serious?" He nodded, a quiet pride in his eyes. "They're sending someone out to do an evaluation next week." She laughed, surprised at how the joy bubbled up in her chest. "That's huge, Tobias. It's because of you," he said. "You kept records, tracked, Expenses fought for it when I was too buried in grief to even try. She shook her head. You kept the heart of this place beating. We both did, he said. And now it's time to grow it. That night they sat on the porch watching the clouds break apart to reveal stars scattered like spilled salt across the dark sky. Maybelle had baked a peach cobbler, and Lily had drawn a picture of the ranch with our home scrawled in wobbly letters across the top. The air was cool, but not cruel, the kind of chill that reminded you were alive. Tobias leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking. I keep waiting for the other boot to drop. It won't, Elsie said. You sure know, she said. But I'm ready if it does. The screen door opened and Maybelle stepped out, her face soft. Phone call for you, honey. Elsie frowned. Who is it, lawyer's office? Something about a final amendment. Her stomach twisted, but she rose, brushing the blanket from her lap. The house smelled of cinnamon and coffee, and the light over the kitchen table hummed gently. She picked up the phone. Mrs. Colburn, a crisp voice said. Yes. This is Amanda Reyes with Fuller and Kent. I'm following up on Mr. Colburn's estate. There's been a development. Elsie tightened her grip on the receiver. What kind of development? It appears your late father-in-law established a second deed privately filed through a separate trust. We weren't aware of it until now because it was sealed under a different name. It names you as the sole beneficiary of the adjacent parcel, an additional 60 acres. Her breath caught. You're saying, you own it all now, Mrs. Colburn, every acre. She hung up the phone in silence. Her heart thudded in her chest like a drum. Slowly, she walked back onto the porch. What was it? Tobias asked. She looked at him, eyes wide, voice soft. He gave me the rest of the land. All of it. Tobias's eyes widened, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. Maybelle clapped a hand over her mouth, tears welling. Lily cheered from inside the screen door. Mama owns the whole thing, Elsie nodded. And suddenly she laughed. Not the cautious kind, not the wary kind. A deep, full laugh that rose from her gut and shook the chill from her bones. No one had saved her. Not the courts. Not the lawyers. Not even Tobias, though his quiet strength had held her steady. She had stood her ground, held her dignity, done the work, and lit the fire herself. And now this land, these people, this life, it was hers. All of it. The wind had a sharp edge that morning, nipping through Nora's shawl as she stepped out onto the porch of the bunkhouse watching the hills. She could see the faint movement of horses at the far end of the paddock, the silhouettes of ranch hands, the outline of Elias heading to the barn. Everything in her life had shifted, and yet the sunrise still came painting soft gold over red earth. Inside, Beth's giggle rang out, and Nora turned with a smile. Beth had found a home here, steady and full of warmth, and Elias, that quiet, guarded man, had become the kind of presence that made Nora feel like maybe she could breathe again. But it hadn't stopped the ache. Not when she thought of the way her aunt sold her like livestock. Not when she thought of the collar they'd snapped around her neck. Not when the dark tried to creep back in, reminding her how easy it would be to believe she didn't deserve peace. You gonna just stand there, darlin', or join us? Elias asked behind her voice, low and easy. He leaned against the doorway with a half grin, arms crossed, that gentle mischief in his eyes. She raised a brow, folding her arms. It's barely dawn. You're grinning like it's Sunday supper. That's 'cause it is, he said, pushing off the post. Beth says she's cooking. You know what that means? Nora laughed. Burned biscuits and the eggs with the shells still in. Exactly. He stepped closer. But she asked me to invite you specially. Said you're not allowed to hide out and be broody. Nora narrowed her eyes at him, then smiled soft. Fine. Inside, Beth was already at the cast-iron stove apron 2 sizes too big. Flour streaked her cheek, and a crooked braid flopped over her shoulder. "You came?" she beamed. "I saved you the pretty biscuit." The biscuit in question was shaped like a boot, half raw in the middle, but Nora accepted it like a treasure. "Best one I've seen." They sat at the old table, sun slowly filling the room. Elias pulled off his gloves, watching them, but Nora could feel the stillness in him. He'd been thinking about something. "I ran into Sheriff Holt," he said finally. "There's been more noise in town about that ring. Women showing up, bruised, some gone missing after being adopted." He said the word with disgust. "It's spreading, not dying." Nora felt her stomach clench. The shadows hadn't stayed buried. Elias continued, voice low. "They got names. One's tied to your aunt. Some rancher out of Arizona. Name come up Monroe Cadell." Nora dropped her fork. The name burned. She hadn't heard it in years, not since the wagon ride when Cadell inspected her like a mare. He'd been the one who placed the collar around her neck, who handed her off to the highest bidder. Her aunt called him the fixer. "I thought he was dead," she said quietly. "Wish he was," Elias murmured. "But he's been seen in Ruidoso, setting up again, worse than before." Beth looked between them, confused. "Who's he, a man who hurts girls?" Nora answered gently, reaching for Beth's hand. "The kind of man we don't let near anyone ever again." Beth squeezed her hand. "He's not coming here right no, honey," Elias said, jaw tightening. "Not if I have anything to say about it," but Nora could see it on him, the storm brewing beneath his calm. Elias was a protector, but this was deeper. Personal. Like a ghost had returned. "I want to help," Nora said. "If they're building this thing again, we can't just sit here." "You've done enough," Elias said softly. "You've lived through enough." "That's not the same as justice," she replied, standing. "I'm not just surviving anymore. I want to fight back." Elias stood too, the wood floor groaning beneath his boots. "I figured you'd say that." He glanced out the window, then back at her. "You still got that paper you found, the one with all the women's names?" Nora nodded slowly. She hadn't looked at it in months, but she knew exactly where it was folded into her old prayer book tucked beneath the bunk mattress. She went to fetch it, heart racing. When she returned, Elias already had a saddlebag open on the table and maps spread out beside it. She laid the paper flat. Dozens of names, birth years, towns, some scratched out, some marked with crosses. "This isn't just a memory," Elias said. "This is a trail." Nora looked down at the list. "Then we follow it." Elias gave a slow nod. "I've got a friend in Alamogordo. Former Pinkerton, now runs a halfway house for girls trying to escape that life. Name's Maeve. She's tough. She'll know where to start." Nora looked over at Beth, who was watching them with wide eyes. "You'll stay with Jessa while we're gone," she told her. Beth's lip wobbled. "But what if you don't come back?" Elias walked over, knelt to her level. "You've got my word, sunshine. Ain't a mountain high enough to keep me from coming back to check on those biscuits." Beth giggled through her tears, hugging him tight. Then Nora. "Promise me," she whispered. "I promise, sweet girl," Nora whispered back. They packed before the sun had climbed too high. Elias moved with purpose, checking saddles and canteens. Nora wrapped the paper in oilcloth and tied it tight. The collar, the iron one, was gone, buried on the hill behind the bunkhouse where wildflowers now grew. But the scar it left still itched some mornings. As they mounted up, the wind picked up again. Not sharp this time, just insistent, tugging like a warning or a call. They rode out side by side, the hills opening wide before them, the land silent and waiting. I used to dream about justice, Nora said softly, as the ranch faded behind them. But now I don't want it for me. I want it for them, the ones still trapped. Elias nodded, eyes forward. Then let's go make it right. The wind whispered in the trees as they crossed the ridge. Somewhere ahead lay the ghosts they'd left behind, waiting to be faced. If he's alive, then I'm not done fighting. Of course. Here's Chapter 12, written to 1,100 words, with continuity, flow, and inclusion of the main quote from the outline. The sun hung low over the canyons, casting long shadows that slithered through the open ridges like secrets returning home. Ira's boots stirred up fine dust as he walked beside the wagon, his palm resting lightly on the wood where the girl sat beside him. Maeve clutched his arm, her small body trembling despite the blanket draped around her shoulders. She hadn't let go since the doctor's cabin. They rode in silence for a while, the ranch hands riding ahead and behind, to give space but never out of reach. No one wanted to talk, not yet. Even Caleb kept his reins tight, his usually loud spirit subdued. Inside Ira's chest, something quiet had broken loose and began pacing, grief, fury, guilt, all tangled in one hard knot. But Maeve needed something steadier than rage. She needed a home that didn't crack apart at the edges, a man she could trust to stay. They crested the hill, and the ranch came into view. Smoke curled from the chimneys. A few horses grazed along the fences, and the windmill clanked like it was sighing through old bones. Maeve's fingers squeezed tighter around his sleeve. Is this where I'll stay? He glanced down at her, not hiding the emotion in his voice. Yeah, sweetheart. This is where you stay, long as you want. That night the kitchen glowed warm. Elva bustled about, laying bowls thick with stew. Caleb pulled up chairs and tried awkward jokes to ease the weight pressing on the girl's shoulders. It worked for a moment. Her lip twitched, almost a smile, but it never reached her eyes. Later, Maeve stood near the hearth, staring into the flames, as if they held the answer she'd never gotten, why her father gave her away. Why no one came back. Why pain followed her like a shadow. Ira walked over, kneeling beside her. You hungry again? She shook her head. He didn't ask more. Just sat there, matching her silence with his own. He'd learned something about grief. It didn't want questions. It just wanted someone who didn't leave. I have something for you, he said after a while, rising to get it. From a side drawer, he pulled a bundle wrapped in muslin. Inside, a small journal. Leather-bound edges worn. This was my mother's, he said softly, offering it. She used to write when she didn't know what else to say. When her heart got too full, she'd spill it here. Maeve hesitated, then took it like it might shatter. Did it help? He nodded. Sometimes. Sometimes it just reminded her she wasn't invisible. Maeve hugged it to her chest, like a lifeline. That night she slept in the small room near the stairs, the one Elva had kept tidy for guests, but never used. She curled into the quilts without protest, the journal under her pillow. Ira didn't sleep. He paced. When morning came, he'd already made coffee, already walked the fence line, already fed the horses. The sun hadn't yet cracked the sky, but the weight in his chest hadn't budged. Caleb found him out near the barn. You look like you fought the devil and lost, Caleb, said, wiping his brow with his hat. We gonna talk about it. Ira leaned against the post. I should have done something sooner. You did more than most would, Caleb replied. She's safe now. She was wearing a collar, Caleb. The words hit the air like a curse. Caleb didn't answer at first. Then he said, You're fixin' to bury it. Ira nodded once. Today, they rode out that afternoon, just the two of them. Maeve stayed behind with Elva and Lou. Ira had asked her if she wanted to come, but she shook her head. I want it gone, she said, but I don't want to see it again. He understood. They rode to the edge of the canyon where the wind hummed low and deep and the earth felt honest. Ira dismounted, pulling the collar from his saddlebag. The buckle clinked. The leather was worn brittle, still stained in places. He dug a hole with his bare hands, not too deep, but deep enough to make it final. Say something. Caleb said, his voice quiet. Ira paused, then whispered. No child should ever carry the weight of someone else's cruelty. He laid the collar in the dirt the way you might bury a memory too heavy to hold. Covered it, pressed the soil down, and stood. A gust of wind rolled through the canyon like an exhale. Neither man spoke. Back at the ranch, Maeve was in the field with Elva. She wasn't smiling, but her shoulders were a little straighter. She watched Ira walk in from the distance and met him halfway. It's gone, she asked. It's buried. She nodded, silent. Then she reached for his hand. They walked together back to the house. That evening, as twilight turned the sky lavender, Ira sat on the porch, while Maeve scribbled into the journal. Elva rocked gently beside them, knitting something small. Do you think people can start over? Maeve asked, her voice uncertain. I think starting over's just another name for choosing not to stay broken, Ira said. She seemed to turn that over in her mind. Then she wrote it down. Inside, Caleb was humming as he boiled coffee. Lou sang softly while brushing the mule's coat outside the barn. Life resumed, not because it had forgotten, but because it chose to go on. Ira looked down at the girl beside him, curled into her seat, finally drifting towards sleep with the journal in her lap and a pencil still in her hand. The ranch lanterns flickered as the wind pushed at the walls like an old friend checking in. And Ira thought about what the doctor had told him before they left. She'll heal, but don't rush it. Love her like it's patient. He would. Because something sacred had shifted inside him, something irreversible. And because he had promised himself the day he buried that collar, whatever was chained to her ends here. I'll carry the weight, but she walks free. The educational lesson learned from this story is that life may strip things away, health, security, family, or certainty, but it can never take the dignity you choose to stand in. When help does not arrive on time, there is quiet strength in building something steady with your own hands and letting others walk beside you. Hard seasons do not mean the end of purpose. Often they uncover it. And sometimes the truest form of love is simply staying long enough for healing to begin and for a new kind of home to take root.